answer.
Professor, these are very contentious issues probably with some traditional educationalists. What problems have you run into in that regard?
Well, they're very contentious, and that's why I'm so delighted that not only the children in Perth, but a lot of other people in Australia are beginning to see that traditional education doesn't so much have to be challenged or attacked, but it has to be encouraged to modify itself. But that's happening in Australia. Now let me tell you some of the problems I've run into. When I became a professor at the University of Manchester, that was my first professorship, I got that professorship because, as the evidence will show, I had persuaded the colliery managers. In those days, the coal industry was Britain's biggest and most powerful industry, and I was asked by the owners of the coal industry to see what could be done to raise its efficiency. I said, if we're going to educate the colliery managers, we must get the colliery managers themselves to argue with each other about their problems. You can't send somebody into a party of colliery managers, somebody who's never managed a coal mine, some of them not even having been down a coal mine, and get them to lecture the managers. But by getting the managers together to discuss with each other their here and now problems, that so improved the efficiency of the pits, as the evidence will show you, that I was invited to become a professor at the University of Manchester. Now, it's one thing to say to real colliery managers, look, get together and argue about your problems with each other, and you'll see the solution of them by trying to build on the most precious asset which the industry has, which, of course, is the lived experience of its real managers. But when I tried to introduce this same idea into a university, things were very different, and I was opposed by all the experts, the professors of sociology, the professors of economics, even some of the professors of what was then called management. They didn't like the notion that it was the people who carried the final responsibility, whether it's the children in the classrooms in Perth, or the managers in the pits, or the surgeons in the operating theatres. My argument to the professors that no, we must get an entirely fresh way of thinking about our problems was bitterly opposed. I couldn't get any support. I actually had to resign my professorship at Manchester and move to a foreign country, and I worked for 10 years in Belgium. So there's plenty of opposition, and when I came out first with that was on manufacturing industry. The evidence for that is very clear indeed. But I did the same thing in hospitals, and when I came out and showed that patients recovered more quickly when the nurses were encouraged to discuss with each other what their problems were, instead of listening to some, or in addition to listening to some expert on hospital organization. When I showed this was true, I was actually ridiculed by the professional papers as getting into moral evangelism. Moral evangelism, just think of this, that I was accused of that because I was saying these nurses have got values and motivation and experience, which if we're professional lecturers and teachers, we simply don't understand because we haven't gone through it as the nurses looking after a dying child have experienced. And because I was touching on this, I was accused of moral evangelism. So, but things, that's 20, 25 years ago. Things are changing all right, and particularly in Australia.
Professor, it seems to me you're saying that action learning it can be a process where people take charge of some of their own learning and development in many respects. Do some people not like to do that?
Well, when you say take charge, they take charge of everything in their immediate here and now. For example, if you like to read the literature, you'll find the Japanese got from me, they call it the Q circle, the quality circle. That was copied from my early work, and there's plenty of independent evidence to show that. But in the quality circle, the workers in a particular part of the factory get together among themselves and share their experience. What they are learning to control, to take charge of, in answer to your question, is their own here and now activities. They're not saying, oh, we are also taking charge of the company as a whole, and we're not going to say this company is now so prosperous that it must actually buy the Rockefeller Center on Manhattan Island, which Japan has done. But that wasn't done by the workers who were doing action learning. But at different levels, yes, I think the action learners who got together in the big enterprises of Belgium, including her 4 largest banks and her biggest manufacturing companies, they got together and said, we're going to see what we can do to help each other solve the terrible problems that are pressing on us. They were almost, I suppose one could say, taking over the whole economy in a sense, because Belgium is so dependent upon the efficiency of its manufacturing industry that if this isn't efficient, the whole country isn't efficient. So in a sense, the action learning of the presidents of Belgium's score and more of biggest enterprises was, in a sense, dictating the whole development of the Belgian economy. But in answering a question like yours, we must be careful not to be too general, to look at the particular conditions, whether it's the 10, 12 workers on the floor breaking off their work for a couple of hours to run a quality circle, or whether it's the constant meeting of the presidents of big enterprises. So,
Professor Revans, you've been involved in action learning for many, many years, and you must have seen and noted the developments that have occurred in that time. Are you encouraged by the direction that it's heading at the moment?
Oh yes, very encouraged, yes. What pleases me most that is at no time have I ever tried to set myself up as an action learning expert. It's true I've been a professor but there's no chair of action learning in any university that I'm aware of, and I've never been running a consultancy or anything like that. I've never advertised action learning and said I can be engaged. I understand there are people in the United States who are selling action learning of a very dubious character and getting $10,000 a day for doing so, but I've never had anything like that. Quite apart from that, yes, I think there's a recognition all over the world that we've got to get those who actually carry the responsibility for dealing with the here and now problems to have authority for tackling them and dealing with them, quite apart from that of the bosses over them. I don't want to get into politics, but in the last 6 months, the news about action learning is getting around the world, and since the pulling down of the Berlin Wall, I've had invitations from Bucharest, Warsaw, Leningrad to go and talk about action learning over there, because my learning equation that I mentioned, L equals P plus Q, is also, you can say, well, P is bureaucracy and Q is perestroika. Was what Gorbachev is saying, okay, we've organized the country, the Soviet Union from Moscow downwards for a long time, now let's get the people involved at the bottom. This is exactly what the school children of Perth are saying about their education.
In recent times, excuse me, whenever we hear action learning, we often hear it in conjunction with action research.
Yeah.
What do you understand by action research?
Well, as far as I understand action research, and 40 years ago I used to hear it, and I wrote my first paper on action learning 52 years ago, but 40 years ago when I was hearing about action research, largely from MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, a chap called Kurt Lewin was talking about action research. He was saying, if we are, as MIT, which I acknowledge to be the leading institution in the world for trying to understand the problems of manufacturing and so forth. He said, if we are going to understand what goes on in so complex a system as a vast factory making motor cars, it's all very well for the clever professor to be able to go to a board and draw on it all kinds of lines and dotted lines and structure and saying this is the movement of the material through here. We can have all that. We can develop operational research in highly logical fashions using complex mathematical analysis, but we've also got to understand the human problems, and therefore we must involve not only the clever people who know how to program computers and work out queuing theorems and so forth, we've also got to involve the work people themselves. So they started talking about action research, research which involved the activities of the human beings who weren't in any way qualified to be professors or lecturers or research workers, but could we get some people, some research workers, a professor or a man writing his doctoral dissertation, get him in there to design the project on which the research is going to be made, but then involve all kinds of people who neither have his qualifications nor are seeking them to get involved in the reality of what he's doing. Okay, that I understand to be action research. It is like action learning to some extent in that it involves all kinds of people whose main motivation is, okay, what are we up to? Why are we doing this? How's it going to affect what we're doing? It's that, rather than being interested in writing some 500-page dissertation, which is then going to be examined by a lot of professors to say, oh, there's a mistake on page 264 or something. So I think action learning goes for as far as possible for the total reality, whereas action research is half academic research and half reality.